What's New York Giants general manager Joe Scoen's biggest offseason challenge? I'll answer that plus more on today's Locked On Giants podcast, coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media. You can follow me at Patricia_Traina on X, formerly known as Twitter, and at Patty Traina, PATTITRAINA on Instagram and Threads. And I want to send a shout out to my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers. If you're new here, welcome. And everybody in between, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, what is General Manager Joe Scoen's biggest offseason challenge? We're going to dive into that, and I'm going to give you my thoughts as to how I think he may handle it and how he should handle it. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming draft. Does it really make sense for the Giants to consider trading up in the first round for a quarterback? I've got some thoughts on that. You're going to probably disagree with me, but I'm going to put them out there anyway, and we can have a discussion, obviously, if you want to comment on it in the comment section on YouTube. And then finally, the New York Giants make the grade. What do I mean by that? Well, we'll talk about an NFLPA study, which evaluated every single NFL team in 11 different categories. And the results might surprise a few of you out there when I reveal them. So that is our agenda for today on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Again, welcome to everybody. All right, let's kick things off, shall we? Let's talk about Joe Scoen's biggest offseason challenge. Now, we all know the state of the Giants. They underachieved last year. They have a lot of roster holes. They have a lot of roster questions. And there's not a whole lot of time, as in infinite time, to get everything fixed, right? The Giants this year have to show some sort of forward progress. They have to show that they are on the right track after, taking a step back a little bit last year. So when you're in that kind of a situation, there's usually a temptation to try to expedite the forward progress, if you will. And that, to me, is where Joe Scoen needs to be very, very careful. I mean, you want to make progress, obviously, but Rome was not built in a day. And this is year 3 of the Joe Scoen, Brian Daboll era. There's a lot of stuff that has to be done. Will everything that needs to be done get accomplished? Probably not. It's very rare that a team finishes everything on their to-do list in an offseason. But what Joe Scoen needs to be very careful of, in my opinion, is in how he allocates his available resources. Now, what do I mean by that? Scoen at the Combine on Tuesday morning spoke of his surprise and delight at having extra salary cap space. The salary cap that he was initially working with, I think he said, was about $241 million. And of course, we all know it went up to $255.4 million. So now all of a sudden, he's got all this extra money. And it's kind of like, if you play the lottery, I guess, if you play the lottery and you're not anticipating you're going to win, but suddenly you win and you've got an extra, I don't know, 1,000, 5,000, however much that you win in the lottery. And now the temptation is to run out and spend it. Okay, maybe you couldn't afford that steak dinner at the fine restaurant, but now that you've got that extra $1,000, you can go out and you can afford to spend on steak rather than having to eat hamburger. This is what Joe Scoen needs to be careful of. And I'm not talking about food, by the way. I'm talking about resisting the urge to go out and spend like a madman in free agency. I'm talking about the urge to go out and overvalue his own free agents. Now, Scoen in my opinion, has a good head on his shoulders. He's not the type of GM that strikes me as somebody who's going to go crazy. I go back to the last year of the Dave Gettleman era when they just went bonkers in free agent spending to the point where they were manufacturing money through restructurings and whatnot because there was such a sense of priority. I think it was year 4 of the Gettleman era. There was such a high priority and there was pressure to get the organization and the franchise back on track. All right. This is year 3, as I mentioned, of the Shane and Abel era. There is a sense of urgency, but that being said, there also has to be a degree of patience. So Shane, will he have a little extra money that maybe he could throw to Saquon or to Xavier McKinney or to Gunnar Olszewski, for example? Yes. Does it mean throw open the bank vault and give them, the whole pie, if you will? No, absolutely not. That's not what you want to get into. All right. We have seen in the past when the Giants go crazy on free agents, it doesn't work. It is not a sustainable formula because these guys maybe help you for a year if you're lucky. And then the following year, their cap hit goes up because, the first year of contracts, you're usually able to keep the first year cap hit low. And then the second year is when it really starts to balloon up. And then lo and behold, if you want to get rid of these guys, guess what? Now you get hit with a ton of dead money. Now you kind of get hamstrung. And that's what happened in the final year of the Gettleman era. And that's why Joe Scoen basically needed over 2 years to kind of clean up that cap. Still cleaning it up, but it's a lot better than when he inherited it. So, you set your values for the players that you want. Saquon Barkley, what's the running back market going to dictate? That's what you offer him. All right. Maybe you go a little bit more, but not too much. Because again, you need money to get yourself through the season. And, most teams will say if you could get about 4 to 6 million, that should get you through the regular season. What with practice squad elevations, what with injuries, when you have to replace injured guys. If you want to extend somebody, that's really playing well, and you want to extend him, you have that flexibility. So you've got to leave yourself with some money. You can't just blow it all in free agency. And then, down the line say, oh, we'll restructure, this guy and that guy and this guy, and, we'll make more money. That's how you get into cap hell. And the Giants need to avoid that. All right. Now, the other factor, obviously, is taking a look down the line. Who are some of the guys that you might want to extend after the season, guys who maybe are in the final year of their contract or coming up on the final year of their contract? Looking ahead, some of the guys that pop out at me, Darius Slayton, Jason Pinnock, Jamie Gillen, Azeez Ojulari. Is there anybody in that group that you can honestly say they have to get it done? Like last year, they had to get Dexter Lawrence done. They had to get Andrew Thomas done. Probably not. You could probably say that there's really nobody there that's ultra pressing. But these are good support players, obviously. And if they continue to perform at a decent level, why wouldn't you look to maybe extend them, lower their current cap hit, and give yourself a little bit of breathing room, which you can certainly do. So, again, you take each case as it comes up, and everybody is different. But to go nuts and say, okay, you know what, we're going to throw the bank at Saquon Barkley to keep him from leaving. Or, hey, Xavier, we're going to make you the highest paid safety because that's what you want. That just is reckless behavior. And I don't think Joe Scoen will do that. I would hope he wouldn't. But again, the allocation of resources, that financial resources, you want to put that money, in my opinion at any rate, you want to put that money towards the positions that need to hit the ground running in 2024. And what do I mean by that? The offensive line. We all know that the offensive line has been a disaster for the last, literally almost the last decade. So, people are saying, oh, go and draft, a young tackle or go and draft a young guard or this or that and the other thing. In my opinion, you go out and you get a veteran and you plug a veteran in on that offensive line to keep it calm, to give yourself depth, to upgrade the quality. The Giants, as we know, have question marks at both guards because we don't know who they're going to be. Is Evan Neal going to be ready? You know, the Giants are still sticking to that story, but I say bring somebody in to compete with him, you know, and if that person loses, let him be the swing tackle. So the offensive line, to me, is a unit that has to hit the ground running. No questions asked, because if that line plays poorly again, then it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. It doesn't matter who the wide receiver one is, the tight ends, whatever. It won't matter. The offense will be just as bad as it's been the last couple of years. All right. Another position on defense that I think the Giants really need to consider allocating their resources towards: edge rusher. They have Kayvon Thibodeau, Azeez Ojulari, if he stays healthy, which he's had trouble doing. And then who else? Really nobody else. I mean, you can make a case maybe for Dexter Lawrence, but Dexter Lawrence really needs, you know, some support around him. So edge rusher has to be a priority. So if I'm building up the roster and I'm mapping out how I'm going to allocate my financial resources, I'm going to obviously see if I can get something done with Saquon. I'm going to definitely see if I could get something done with Xavier McKinney. I don't know if they'll be able to, but, you know, I would at least try. And I spend on an offensive lineman. I spend on a veteran edge rusher. And I might consider bringing in also a cornerback, a veteran cornerback, because I'd be a little reluctant to have two young guys back there, even though I think Deonte Banks is going to be fine. And he could probably function if they put a rookie back there or a young player who's not as experienced. So that's how I would allocate the resources. And that's, you know, I'm not saying that's how Joe Scoen's going to do it, but again, if nothing else, don't go nuts. Don't go getting excited thinking, okay, I'm going to spend like crazy. And now all of a sudden you're left with, you know, holes on your roster that you could have addressed if you had planned better. All right, coming up next, should the Giants really consider trading up in the first round? I have some thoughts about that. I'll tell you what they are right after this. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so that you can do more of it. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suitable to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you find your assigned therapist isn't a match, you can switch at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast, probably next week, early next week, we'll do this. We're going to touch base with some of the independent scouts that have been at the combine, who get to see the workouts and whatnot, and kind of get their impression on the workouts at the various position groups. One of the scouts that I know I'm going to reach out to is Rick Saratella, who I've had on the show before. He's terrific. I love Rick, known him for a long time. So he'll be one of the guests we bring on, and I'm going to see if I can get another one. Won't tell you who it is, but I'm working on one other one who's pretty well known, and hopefully I'll be able to get this individual to come on the show and give us an updated look at how maybe his draft board is falling into place. So that's all coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, as always, thank you for tuning in and giving us a listen. All right. Should the Giants trade up in the NFL draft? Now, I know when Daniel Jeremiah of NFL Network made that suggestion and said that it was in play, I think Mike Garafolo might have mentioned it might have been in play as well. I got to thinking, does it really make sense for the Giants to trade up in the first round to get a quarterback? Now, a lot of you are going to say, absolutely, Daniel Jones is not the guy. The Giants have got to get their guy. You know, hopefully they're not going to be drafting in the top 10 every year, certainly not again next year. So go out, get the guy, get him, in place so that you can transition off of Daniel Jones. Now, when Joe Scoen spoke about Daniel Jones and the belief in the that the organization still has in him. I know a lot of you were like, well, what do you expect him to say? He's not going to say anything bad about Daniel Jones. No, probably not. But then again, he could have said nothing too. I mean, Joe can be sometimes, I think, a little too honest for his own good. So that being said, with regards to the quarterback, this is a deep class. And Shane, of course, said that when he spoke to the media on Tuesday. He said it's not just deep in the first round, it's deep going into day 2. So if you're the Giants, you say to yourself, okay, if Daniel Jones is healthy, we're going to start him. Because I think regardless if they went and they got a quarterback in the first round or in the second round, they're going to want to break that kid in, get him acclimated, coach him up a little bit, and then turn the reins over at some point when, when the time is right. So in the meantime, you've got Daniel Jones, but why not, if you're the Giants in the first round, get a player who could maybe help you a lot quicker? All right. I'm thinking in terms of a receiver, which I still think is the way they're going to go. So far, there has been nothing that has convinced me that they won't go receiver. But here's the thing, folks. What if the Giants have grades, similar grades on the top receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze? Maybe could the Giants explore trading down in the first round to pick up some extra draft picks? I'd be in favor of that, wouldn't you? Considering that the Giants are not getting any comp picks this year, considering, they've got the extra pick from Seattle in the second round. And who knows, maybe they are looking at the second round and they're saying to themselves, you know what? We wouldn't mind trading up to like the first or second slot in the second round so that we have our pick of the litter of guys we want. And what better way to do that than to trade down and pick up some additional assets? So the question now becomes, what kind of trade? Who would be a willing trade partner? And what would the Giants need to give up in order to trade down? Okay, so I came up with one scenario. Obviously, I would not trade down too far from 6. I wouldn't go crazy and drop into the teens. I know, over on Giants Country, Coach Gene Clemens did a mock draft where he traded down a couple times, and I think he traded into the middle part of the first round. I'd be a little more conservative if I were making the decision. But I would look to see if maybe Atlanta would want to move up. Atlanta is set to draft, 8th. Right? So I go to Atlanta and I say, okay, hey, listen, you guys need a quarterback. You guys need an edge rusher. You guys need, I believe they need a cornerback. So how about we swap places in the first round? You move up to 6. We move down to your spot at 8. And you throw in the 74th pick overall, which is a third round pick, which would kind of balance out, the trade-off. Now, if you're Shane and you want to go move up in the second round, like I said, to the first spot, which is held by Carolina, or if you want to maybe go to the Patriots spot, now you've got some ammunition to do it while not depriving yourself of a pick in an entire round. So for me, I think it just makes too much sense not to consider trading down. Now, certainly the Giants could stay put at 6 and they could take the best available on their board. I don't think they'll go wrong, just based on how the board is being projected to fall. If those top 3 quarterbacks are the first 3 picks off the board, and then you have, let's say, for example, Marvin Harrison Jr. comes off the board and an edge rusher comes off the board, the Giants can still maybe finagle a trade down to get additional picks. And I would be in favor of that. I know Joe Scoen likes to move around, but he doesn't have a lot of assets to do that. I know Joe Scoen would rather not skip around. All right. So, this talk of trading away both number 2s to move up to, in the draft with Patriots, that would basically mean that the Giants would have to go from the 3rd spot all the way down to, the 3rd round. And I don't think Joe Scoen is going to want to do it. I could be wrong. I don't think he's going to want to do it because this team is not one player away from making a serious run. It is several players away. If it were one player away, it would make sense. Several players away with a lot of needs, It doesn't make sense. So that's what I would do. Will Shane do the same thing? We'll see, obviously, but I don't get the feeling right now, as I record this, that trading up is really going to be in the team's best interests. Shane might feel differently. Obviously, that's why he gets paid the big bucks to make those kinds of decisions, but that's how I would approach it. All right, coming up next, the Giants made the grade. What am I talking about and what grades? I'll tell you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, football season is officially in the books, but that doesn't mean the excitement of betting on sports is over. Right now, you can get buckets when you place your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and the grades are in. What grades am I talking about? The NFLPA ran a survey last season asking all of its member teams, the players on its member teams, to grade 11 different categories of each team. So, for example, the Giants were asked to grade their head coach, the way that the team treats the families, the facilities, the food, the strength and conditioning. There were like 11 different categories. And this might surprise some of you. I imagine this is going to surprise a few of you. But amongst the highest grades that the Giants players gave to their team, the training staff, which got an A-, and the head coach, Brian Daboll, who got an A-. Now, for those of you out there who are constantly saying that the Giants have the worst training staff in the NFL because of the injuries, folks, I keep telling you, that's not how they're perceived within the league circles. The Giants have one of the better training staffs in the league. And I know a lot of you are going to say, but what about all the injuries that they have? How do you explain that? Well, folks, that's a combination of things, from strength and conditioning to diet and nutrition to rest to whether a guy is just injury prone. There's just any number of factors. Plus, the game is a violent game. Injuries are going to happen. But the training staff, as led by Ronnie Barnes, high grades. All right. Now, where did the Giants get low grades? They got low grades in nutrition, dietitian, C+. Locker room, got a C+. The treatment of families, they've got a C there. Let's talk a little bit more about the other grades here. The head coach grade is a new category added to this year's survey. So for all this talk about Brian Daboll and how he doesn't know how to talk to people and how he could rub people the wrong way with his competitiveness, the players still felt that at the end of the day, Daboll listened to them, that he heard them and he responded accordingly. It wasn't a case of my way or the highway. The locker room, they gave that grade a C+. All right. The locker room, the biggest complaint, if you will, is that the players feel like there's not enough space for each personal locker, which I can kind of agree with. I mean, I see in the locker room, a lot of guys like to spread out to a second locker. I personally think that while the locker room is big enough, it's also very cluttered, in my opinion. They put temporary lockers in there, for the practice squad guys. I think there's plenty of lockers if they were to actually fit everybody in. I just think the locker room is kind of cluttered. The locker spaces, to me, they seem like they're kind of narrow, especially for all the, the equipment that these guys have. Sometimes guys have different, shoulder pads or, uniforms or whatever. So yeah, I could agree with that. I could get on board with that. The treatment of families, the biggest complaint there was that while the Giants have daycare for the kids on game day. They have no family room like they did in the old Giants Stadium. Fun fact, the media workroom in the old Giants Stadium used to be the family room for the players' children. And they used to have like daycare workers that would, kind of babysit them while the mothers and the families were out at the games. They don't have that apparently at MetLife Stadium. Now, whether they have it off site at the Quest, that I don't know, but that was the big complaint, if you will. Now, this one might surprise some of you guys. I've seen some of you say, God, the Giants have the worst ownership in the NFL. They didn't rank last. Believe it or not, the Kansas City Chiefs ownership ranked last. How did the Giants rank? Ownership got a B+. We're 8.8 out of 10 players felt that John Mara, who is one of the co-owners, was more than willing to invest in the facilities. So for those of you who think that John Mara is cheap, that John Mara doesn't care, that's not how the players see it. So, the Giants, when it was all said and done, ranked 8th amongst the 32 teams for, having the best workplace. The Miami Dolphins were the clear runaway winners. They got A's across the board. They were the number 1 ranked team. I think the Packers were up there, and I believe the Minnesota Vikings were also in the top 5. So the Giants, not that bad of a workplace, right? They ranked in the middle of the pack. Still some room for them to improve, obviously. And I will say this, I'll give you this little tidbit. The grades did take a slight dip, a tiny dip from the year prior when they ran this study. Not that much of a dip, but a slight dip. So overall, for those of you who feel that the Giants organization has gone down the tubes, the players view it differently. Now, I get it. You're like, well, the results haven't shown up, and that's what matters. And you would be absolutely right to say that. But the foundation is in place, and it's just a matter of, fixing some of the roster holes, addressing some of the coaching issues that they had last year, which, Gable did in shaking up his staff. So again, it all boils down to, you're not going to fix everything in one off season, but if you could fix the majority of the issues that you have, then chances are you're going to have a better season than you did the year prior. At least that's the hope. So on that note, that'll do it for us on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Keep it here the rest of the week. More episodes coming your way here on the Locked On Giants podcast.